pleasure to speak with Jack O'Halloran. Jack, how are you doing today?
Doing the best I can, whatever they'll let me get away with.
Oh, well, you've gotten away with quite a bit in your life, and it's going to be great to talk about the many highlights. So, Jack, of course, you're known for your heavyweight boxing. From what I understand, you boxed from 1966 to 1974, which that's some of that's kind of the heyday of boxing when you think about who
Yeah,
was fighting at that time.
I fought them all. And there's about 25 fights of mine that were never even registered because they had shows. They used to run. Sam Silverman and his partner ran shows all over New England. Every week they had a boxing show somewhere. Portland, Maine, and Bangor, Maine, and they all over the place. So I would go. A lot of us fighters hung out together in Boston, and we would go to these fights. And Sam Silverman said, "Oh, well, I'm short of bout, Jack. Would you mind it?" And I said, "Well, my management made it. Well, no, but we'll put you under another name."
And you started out with quite a run of victories.
Yeah, and they discovered that I had a disease called acromegalia, which is a tumor of the pituitary gland. And the doctor said, "How do you even get in the ring? How do you get yourself?" Because it causes major depression and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And he said, how can you fight?" And I said, "Well, it's my day job. That's boom." So I just continued going on.
I mean, I saw where you fought like Ken Norton, George Foreman.
George Foreman,
Uh,
Ken Norton, Alvin Blue Lewis, Danny McAlinden, uh, Terry Daniels, Cleveland Williams.
kind of a who's who.
A ranked fighter for about 7, 8 years, and I'm in a couple boxing Hall of Fames, and um, I could have, if I paid attention to boxing as much as I did other things in the street, I probably would have been would have been. Ali and I were signed to fight 4 times,
Oh wow.
and it just never happened. In fact, he was supposed to fight me the first time he fought Norton. We had a contract and everything, and they went to Chicago, and they handed Herbert Muhammad a few $1 million. And Ali called me on the phone crying. He said, I really don't know how to tell you this, but I don't have any control over it." So
I,
we were good friends, he and I. So
I don't know if you're aware, but a lot of those boxing matches is from the time you were fighting are on YouTube. And I watched one night. I probably about 8 Muhammad Ali fights in a row. I mean, they're just the full broadcast. So it's a lot of cool stuff. Maybe I'll send you some. If you want to look at some of them.
Ali was an amazing athlete. Period. He would have been
Yeah.
great in any sport he portrayed. And
When you think of Muhammad Ali, he probably would have made a great actor as well. I think he even did act in a few films.
he was a good friend. I liked him a lot. He was amazing. Gorgeous George, the wrestler, is the one who schooled him and said, get in that mouthing off and dialogue and all that stuff. He said, because you'll get 50% of the people will hate you and want to see you get beat, and 50% will want to see you win, so you'll own the whole crowd.
So just generally speaking, I mean, what was it like going in the ring the first time? Like, were you kind of was the adrenaline high and you're just ready to go, or were you kind of
Yeah,
not sure
I
what to
think the
expect?
first fight I had, I knocked the guy out in 76 seconds or something.
Oh wow.
And the guy was, and I remember going back into the dressing room. It was up in Reading, Pennsylvania. It was just a preliminary 4 round fight. And I remember the guy, because I split the side of his head open, and he was screaming, "Well, you said this guy couldn't fight. Oh my God, look what he just did to me." Oh my God. Fighting boxing was a great sport. And unfortunately, I had a lot of great talent, natural talent from it. And so I would take fights on a week's notice and stuff, you know,
Right.
because I was doing other business in different cities and Europe and the same thing. And when I fought Norton, they called me on the phone and said I was living in New Jersey, and the promoter called me up and he said, "Would you fight Ken Norton?" I said, "When?" He said, "Next week." I said, "Send me a ticket." He said, "You'll take the fight?" I said, "Yeah." send me a ticket because we had some indictments over union problems because we were involved in taking care of some union business. And I wanted to get out of town. So I went to San Diego and I trained a week for the fight and actually beat Norton. It was his hometown. And stupid, I should have known. In the ninth round, they, the crowd was standing up on the chairs. It was a great fight.
Mm-hmm.
And they were screaming and crowding. When they rang the bell, they had to ring the bell 4 times before anybody heard it. So when the referee separated us and I was going back to my corner, Kenny ran across the ring and hit me behind the head and drove me into the corner.
Wow.
And Joey Almus, the commissioner, was sitting in my corner and he jumped up and he said, "If you can't continue, you just won the fight on a foul." And I said, "Foul? I'm going to kill this guy." Very foolishly, he went out in the 10th round and the fight went the limit and he got a decision, a home decision. I stayed in
Okay.
San Diego and knocked out a half dozen guys, and I beat Henry Clark, who nobody wanted to fight. Henry
Wow.
was ranked like number 3 in the world, and he was California heavyweight championship, and I took his title away from him.
Nice. I feel like boxing's just, I don't know the management of it, or it just maybe MMA's kind of pushed it aside. But I used to love watching boxing. I just don't see it.
Well, they don't, boxing fighters don't fight enough. I used to fight every other week. I loved it. It's just I had a lot of fights in 9 years, and
Right.
it's a sport that you have to stay very active in. And all the old timers. I mean, I knew fighters that had 130 fights. I mean,
Part of training was boxing.
yeah. I mean, they fought all the time, unless they were cut and they had to wait for the cut to heal. But the guys boxed all the time. I was in California, and I had, because of organized crime, they took my license away with something that turned out to be not true. And they called me on the phone and they said, "Will you fight Alvin Blue Lewis?" And Alvin Blue Lewis was ranked number 2 in the world. He had just he went 13 rounds with Ali in Ireland, and he came back. He beat Ernie Terrell and another guy, and they were trying to get another Ali fight. And if he got by me, he could get a fight with Ali. And they called me on the phone. And they said, "Will you fight Alvin Blue Lewis?" And I said, "Can I get a license in Michigan?" And they said, "Yeah, no problem." And I went out and I beat Blue Lewis terrible. I beat him to death. And I won a big decision out there in his hometown. And then I went back up to Ali's camp, and and I said, "It's time that we really got this thing on, son." And he's such a showman. We went into another room, into a dressing room, and all the press and all were up there at his camp, and we put on a show. We were kicking and punching the door. They thought we were in there fighting. And we opened the door, and Ali was laughing like hell. And we
That's
sat
great.
down to have dinner, and I said, he said to me, "If I give you a title fight, are you really going to try and beat me?" And I said, "I'll tell you what, champ. For the first time in my life, I'll go away to camp like you guys do and train 6 to 8 weeks. And when you come in the ring, bring a gun with you because you're going to need it." He
Nice.
said, "2 steaks, please." And we would. I loved Ali. Ali was when you talked to him one on one, he was a totally different person. He was very clever.
Yeah. He was definitely a showman. I mean, yeah. I mean, looking at your boxing record, I mean, you were boxing basically every other month,
Yeah.
and
No, I
for the
mean,
most
I
part.
beat McAlinden was the champ of Ireland and England, and Carl Gizzy was the heavyweight champ of Wales. I beat him in England, and Joe Bugner I actually beat. It was a 10-round fight in Albert Hall, and they cut it down to 8 because he was out on his feet, and they gave him a quarter of a point decision. And even the newspapers the next day had never heard of a quarter of a point decision because I beat him pretty soundly, Bugner, and he would never fight me again either.
Who was probably the most menacing opponent that you came up against Who was
I tell you,
your?
the guy that hit the hardest was Cleveland Williams.
Okay.
Cleveland Williams, I fought Cleveland Williams. They called me on the phone to fight a kid, Terry Daniels, who was ranked like 6th or 7th in the world. They were looking for a fight for Frazier. They wanted Frazier to fight somebody in the Houston Astrodome. So I went down. They called me the promoter for Houston. The guy was from Florida. Called me on the phone. He said, "Would you fight Terry Daniels?" And I said, "Sure. Well, send me a ticket." So I went down and I destroyed Terry Daniels. I knocked him out in 3 rounds. But when I got off the plane, he said, "My God, you're in great shape." And I said, "Aren't you supposed to be in shape when you fight, or what?" And and so I flew back to Philly with Yank Durham on the plane. He was down there watching the fight, and he said to me, "You beat one more good fighter, you can have the Frazier fight." And I said, "You pick the fighter in the place and send me a ticket." He said, "Are you serious?" I said, "Serious heart attack. You pick the fighter in the place and send me a ticket." So they called me up a week later and said, "Will you fight Cleveland Williams next month in Houston, Texas?" I said, "Absolutely." So I beat Cleveland Williams, but in the 3rd round, my God, he hit me a left hook. And I thank God I was in shape. He hit me a left hook. I felt it in my toes.
Oh wow.
I cuffed him and spun him around and I whispered in his ear and I said, "You'd never touch me the rest of this night, son." And I gave him a boxing lesson.
Looks like that one went. That was back September '71,
Yeah.
and from what I can tell, it looks like you went 10 rounds together. So that
Yeah.
must have been
Well, the
you
last
guys.
3 rounds I was holding him up. I hit him a combination. He'd go to fall, I'd pick him up, and I say, "Man, don't be falling down on me now. We've been dancing all night." And he was getting old at that time, and and if he got knocked out, it would have stopped his earning power, and that was his living.
Yeah,
I like Cleveland. Cleveland was a good guy.
but a lot of great actors started in
Oh,
boxing.
Jack Palance was a fighter.
Uh
Mitchum was a fighter.
huh. When you mention these business things where you need to get moved out, is that what you were doing at the time? You had.
Well, we were doing a lot of union business with the iron workers and Teamsters, and Jimmy Hoffa was a good friend of mine, and we settled some strikes with him and stuff like that.
Nice.
And my
Which
father, I had a very famous father.
right. No, we're going to talk about your father and your book here in a little
Yeah.
bit. Family Legacy, which
Well, I was
just
taking care of some family business, and at the time when I was boxing, and that gave me an opportunity to go from state to state, and I had a day job. You always had to have a day job.
oh yeah.
Boxing was a day job, so I didn't really, I didn't put my heart and soul into as much as I should have. And if certain people were around, I probably would have been champion of the world. But
Yeah.
I never, I didn't care. I used boxing as a day job. It was great, and blah, blah, blah. And then I kicked myself in the butt afterwards because I had a lot of natural talent, and it was my own foolishness. You know.
Was it very lucrative at that time?
No, that was I mean, I had to make money. I was making money in the street a lot more than I was boxing. I started boxing for $10 a round.
Oh
I mean,
wow.
I had a contract. They paid me $150 a week, $150 a week to train. And Ali was the one that brought money into boxing.
Right.
He's the one that created the purses and stuff. And he and I, it would have been a great purse. But I mean, God, if somebody gave me $1 million to fight, you'd have to bring a gun in the ring. I mean,
um,
when I tell you.
did you spar with Muhammad Ali?
Never sparred with each other. We talked about it a couple of times, but he said, when I said to him, I said, "I don't want to spar. We want to fight you." You know, the
Right. Right.
he was we were good friends. We spent a lot of time together. He was, and his whole Parkinson's thing was not actually what brought that on. Was his training camp in Pennsylvania was next to a mink farm, and they used to spray for rodents on the mink farm, and he'd be out doing his road work, And these kids from Pennsylvania did a serious blood test on him and found out that he was poisoning himself. And it broke his
Well,
body down. The insecticide spray that they used actually poisoned his body. Lucky he
so
didn't die, actually.
so it wasn't the fighting. It was,
No, it had nothing to do with fighting. No.
huh? Wow.
No, he was, I mean, I remember when he was going to fight Foreman and he said to me, Jack, tell me about George Foreman. And I said, I think he gets tired, man. I said, I got caught with a lucky punch with George. I only trained, I think, 8 days for the Foreman fight.
Hmm.
And I hurt him in the second round. And it was my own mistake of not following it up. In fact, you could see that fight on YouTube. It's a pretty good fight.
Do you have a favorite boxing movie or a movie that you feel like best represents the sport?
Wow, there's a couple. I mean, Willie Pep was a great fighter. My God, was he a great fighter. But the Robert De Niro fight when he fought
Raging Bull.
Raging Bull was a great fight.
You remember Anthony Quinn,
Yeah,
Requiem
Breaking for
for a
Heavyweight.
Heavyweight?
Yeah,
That's an underrated one.
that was a good film fight. Yeah,
Mm.
Rocky was my life.
Oh yeah.
Stallone, we did Farewell My Lovely. Stallone came out with Joe Spinell with a half dozen of half dozen guys from New York to fill in some character roles on Farewell My Lovely. And Stallone had a small part in the movie, and he picked my brain every day because he wasn't from Philly. I told him about Philadelphia. I was a gangster fighter. I was a
That's
hooligan, and
that's really interesting because yeah,
that was
you
my life. He did, like we talked about the waterfront and the mafia and everything else, and he wrote, and God bless him, he did well.